going to be an amazing show today. We are both tuning in today from Orange County, California. Not so sunny, foggy today, but thank God we're getting some rain because we're all about cleansing in this community. Cleansing a lot of the things that don't serve you, such as toxins and trauma, body toxins, emotional trauma, and all the things that are holding you back from living your full potential and following your heart and ultimately your soul goal. So today I have Dr. Felice Gersh with me, and she is superstar for women's vagina and empowerment and energy and everything that you believe that you think that you need in order to fulfill your destiny in life. And although, of course, you know, sometimes we think it's just fixing our body and that's all we need to do. But as you guys know, what I'm all about is all of the things, the mind, the body, the spirit, so that you can follow all of them and as a fully embodied and empowered woman. So today we're going to be working with Dr. Felice Gersh. Let me just announce her first. This is her little short bio, and I'll put the rest of it in the show notes later. But she is a double board certified OBGYN and integrative medicine practitioner. She's kind of a big deal, awarded as Orange County Medical Association's Physician of the Year for the last 13 years consecutively, and Southern California's Super Doctor Award for the last several years. That's something I have never even heard of. So she's got a cape on, as you can see, her little scarf. Super Award of the Year. Dr. Felice Gersh, thank you so much for being here today with us.
Well, I'm so happy to join you here, and I appreciate so much what you're doing to help women really understand how to optimize their health, their quality of their lives. It's so important, and I'm so happy I can be part of that with you today.
Yay, yay, and thank you back for what you do for women. And sometimes I do the show and the guys are like, well, what about the men? And I'm like, well, hey, if you got a fully embodied and empowered woman, then you have happy wife, happy life, right? So today we're going to talk about many things ranging from how to create the perfect OBGYN relationship with you as your healer and doctor as facilitator, so that you are a team and you are not leaning on them to do the work for you. So you're co-creating things together. What questions, labs, and scans are ideal to help you dig into the root causes of your symptoms and not just manage the symptoms with Band-Aids. We're going to talk about the one thing that you must focus on beyond labs, vitamins, and food if you want to thrive. And it is not what you think it is. This one's going to be huge. Now, one of the things I'm most excited about today to talk about is that for me, sometimes I get really passionate about what frustrates me, what triggers me. And one of the things that frustrated me when I went in to see my OB, and no disrespect to him at all, I love him. He's out of practice now, but he said, oh, they made it to where it's not a good idea to do your own self-examination because we were finding that it was making women very paranoid and they were, you know, feeling things that weren't there. And so just leave it up to us. And I just thought that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel like a partnership. That feels like, you know, we'll take care of it. You don't need to worry about it. And then what if there's something going on that could have been discovered, you know, months, years prior to? So that's why I'm really excited today to have you on, because I would love for you to paint a picture for women today. And you can run with the topic I just gave you. And we're going to go through each specific thing like lab tests and scans, specifically with what you do in your practice too. And we'll talk about how you help people offline as well. But what would an ideal and successful visit with an OBGYN look like today, as well as the ensuing visits to develop a partnership, a friendship, a ship? They're on the ship together, right? And not just, yeah, they're both driving.
Absolutely. Well, you hit it really the nail on the head when you criticize the whole concept that you hand over your health to someone else. So really, when you go to see your OBGYN, there are things that you can't do for yourself, not well. You know, you can definitely do a breast exam, but it's always good to get someone else because it's a little different perspective when someone is feeling that doesn't feel on both sides of it. But you certainly can't easily do your own pelvic exam. And you know, there's so much now that people are doing on their own, like people order their own blood work. But I really believe that you're paying for the professional knowledge. That's really, what do I have that someone else doesn't have? It's, first of all, I have the scientific knowledge, the background, I have decades of experience, and hopefully I can put that all together to enable people to then live the healthiest lives they can, because I am only there in the room with them for such a tiny blip of their lives. So really what I have to do is to spark the fire to get them to really make the healthy choices all the times when I'm not there with them, which is the bulk of their lives. So it's really a very critical and yet a very minor role that I can play in some people's lives. In some ways, I know I have saved lives because I found things when I do my exams. That's why I'm a big believer in the physical exam. I'm very old-fashioned. I believe in like the laying on of the hands. And I think, the whole idea of doing everything digitally. I'm all about the digital world, but I really think that in person, there's the physical, the energy that passes back between two people, the sharing of feelings that you sometimes have when you're in the room and you feel the energy in the room, and then actually doing a physical exam. They've really downplaying that a lot. And that's sort of where the whole idea of not doing your own breast exam came from. The US Health Task Force came out and actually recommended that no one do a breast exam, not the doctor either. That's right. They said a pelvic exam almost as a screening tool doesn't make sense. And it's crazy. This is our US Health Task Force. And the doctors, if they blindly follow this advice, it makes it sound like nothing is about anything important. And what they're really saying is that it's all about finding cancer at an early stage. And what they're saying is that they haven't seen statistically that doing a breast exam lowers breast cancer mortality, or doing a pelvic exam lowers ovarian cancer mortality. Now, they're talking about big populations, but who knows about the individual? Plus, there are things that aren't cancer. There are things that people can have also benign breast disease. And if you do have cancer, I think you want to find it at an earlier stage than a later stage. If you have an ovarian mass, you want to find it at an earlier stage. And so it's really it's crazy. I mean, I disagree so often with the US Health Task Force's advice, but a lot of doctors blindly follow it. And that's where it's coming from. So as you know, many of us are outliers in our community. And I'm an outlier because, I really believe that you can really help a woman by doing a physical. So definitely you want to have a relationship with a doctor that you feel does a thorough physical exam, that actually doesn't just fly over you and it's like a flyby, that you really get a detailed exam. Like when I do an exam, I palpate the thyroid gland, I listen to the heart and the lungs, and I palpate the abdomen, the area of the liver, the gallbladder. I can check if there's enlargement of things. I check the kidneys, in the area to see if there's any tenderness. So you want to look at the skin. I found melanomas on patients who had no idea. So you want to check the joints. You want to see, how everything is working together. So as a holistic doctor, I really do look at the whole body. So you really want to have a doctor that looks at your whole body and really takes the time to do a really good, thorough physical exam. And then, of course, you want to have a doctor that will take a detailed history and lets you talk. So often the visits are so short, or they'll say, make another appointment. It's like, they'll say you have one question, you have one problem. And it's so frustrating. So, you have to have time. That's why my annual physicals are 1 hour in the room with me. That's not counting the time with the medical assistant or the check-in or the checkout or lab draws, just a full 1 hour with me. So that, because remember, I'm not seeing my patients on a regular basis, in the sense that every week I'm going to see them, we're not having dinner together. And so I may only see a patient once or twice a year, unless they're having problems, in which case, there's no limit, right? If they're having problems. But, for a routine checkup, I may see a patient once a year. I need to have time to really see what's going on. And sometimes it's amazing what happens almost at the end of the hour. Like they'll tell me something, that is really catastrophic, like someone abused them. Or
yes.
They'll share a trauma, even from their childhood, that they never shared. And we ask these questions, every single time. Have you ever been abused? And things. And sometimes people don't say, and they just don't want to talk about it. And then at the end, because we have the time to really build rapport, and we have, they know that they can say anything to me, that they'll share something that is really earth-shaking when I hear it, and like I had a patient and she said, no, I've never had any sexual assaults. I've never had any trauma or anything. And then at the end of the visit, she told me about a disabled brother who she ended up, who became, had bipolar and had paranoia. And she was his caregiver and he was actually abusive. And it's like, she didn't tell me. It's like, you know, that really is a situation of abuse. And she said, yeah, I know, but he didn't mean it. You know, but she was the victim. So, but, you know, but yes, I mean, he had mental illness, but, you know, but he was definitely abusing her for years through her childhood. And she never actually talked about it or thought about it. So, you know, you have to be willing to, you have to be comfortable enough with your doctor, I hope. And who should be the most intimate doctor that you have in your life, but your OBGYN, that you can share your deepest fears, your deepest emotions, everything with, you know, not that we can solve all your problems, but, you know, because we don't have, maybe we're not going to be your psychologist, but we can direct you and we can help and can show caring and compassion. And it's amazing how so many women, they haven't felt comfortable to share some of their most important things. And we know the link between emotions and your health are so powerful. So many women, when they come in and their chief complaint is pelvic pain. And so many hysterectomies are done on women for pelvic pain, and they remove normal organs. And then the pain gets better, but it's really a placebo effect. And then it comes right back. And what you really find out is that they really had some kind of trauma, emotional or sexual, and they, without realizing it, or tensing their pelvic floor muscles and creating a chronic state of muscle spasm, and that leads to pain. Just like if you're chronically tensing your back, you're going to get back pain. If you're clenching your jaw, you're going to get headaches and jaw pain, right? So it's their version of teeth grinding, is tensing the muscles in their pelvis. And so many women have had hysterectomies, you know, and surgeries for pelvic pain, and no one ever talked to them about like what happened. So, I mean, I view all of this as critically important to having a really top-notch relationship with your OBGYN, so that every problem that you have is really gone into in great depth, because we know that things are not always at first what they may seem.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's like a hallelujah. It's so refreshing. It's just so refreshing to hear you say this. Like leading with, there are two big things that most people experience: is toxins and trauma. And, you know, in our work that we do with women, we work with them for 8 weeks and we talk about this trauma, and it takes a while to come to the surface, because shame is the darkest emotion. And that's the one that takes us out. That's what's causing a lot of suicide and depression, and putting on all kinds of masks to be for the world and whatever the world we think needs of us. And there's 10 different masks throughout the day, and that causes a lot of confusion. Then we wonder why our adrenals and our thyroid, like the Dow, thyroid, adrenal, ovaries, are so depleted, because we're out there spending our energy, not serving, but spending our energy and wasting it on what we think we need to do. And then that all starts with that shame, and it's so far down there. So that's important. That I think everybody listening is probably hearing refreshing in this, because what you get 7 minutes, maybe 15 minutes with the standard OB, and you might share that, which you can't really in an 8-minute or 15-minute session. And they go, oh, okay, I need to refer you to a psychologist or a therapist. And you're going to get probably an antidepressant just to shove the shame down even further. And then that's going to express itself in your organs, and you're going to have even more inflammation. You're going to lose another organ, like your gallbladder or something. And it just keeps going on and on. And that's where, you know, our kidneys is where fear lives, and then anger lives in your liver. So if you don't let these things out and you don't detox them and let go of the story that you have with them, then you're just going to, like Dr. Felice just mentioned, is you're just going to have more and more organs removed, and more prescriptions, and more labs. And you said something really important, because this is what I've been feeling too. And we've got 2 women who commented. I'm loving the comments that are coming in right now, which is perfectly appropriate. That Heather Ann, tuning in from Germany, she mentioned that she just moved recently there. What should I look for and ask about when choosing an OBGYN? I'm 40, had 2 kids in my mid-30s by cesarean birth and vaginal birth. I feel exhausted on a daily basis, especially right before and during menses. I'm thinking I need a comprehensive physical, including blood work. So we'll talk about that next, Heather. And I believe we pretty much just dialed it in really well for you on what kind of relationship would be optimal, functional thrival with an OBGYN instead of just let's run some labs and let's just look to see if everything looks non-inflamed or looking for cancer only. And then Elisa mentions, and she's probably following me because what I'm experiencing too, as you may know, Dr. Felice, that I'm experiencing breast implant illness symptoms and issues and lots of probably fibroid cystic breasts, cysts around my implants. And she's commenting, I'm from Ontario. Hi, Elisa, suffering from breast implant illness at the moment, so I can't wait for explant. Yay, sister, to feel alive again. Mava JJ feels dead at the moment, she says. Hope it comes back to life after I get my health and life back. Going to listen in for tips for afterwards. Awesome. So there's a lot of ladies tuning in and asking really empowering questions. And Heather says, yes, an hour-long appointment would be awesome. Right? Right? Could you imagine a doctor that sits like, look at this woman, look at this doctor, and the empathy and the care rolling off of her eyes and her heart and her soul. And you could just feel that. That feeling is what you want with a partnership in a doctor. That's what you want. You don't want someone to come save you. You want someone to serve you. It's a totally different, one is very disempowering, one's empowering, one is the victim, one is the victor. So it's two different things. So can we talk a little bit about the types of scans? Because there's a lot of talk today about, the standard of care is go get a mammogram, don't touch your breasts, like we were just talking about. So you may have some things to talk about and comment on with respect to scans and labs. So can we go over some of those, Dr. Felice, and what you recommend in your practice?
Absolutely. We live in a challenging world. And we have, like you've mentioned, we live in, I call it poison world. We live in a toxic soup where we're exposed to all kinds of elements, whether it's electromagnetic radiation, environmental toxins, chemotoxins, and we have, the chemicals, we have the biotoxins like mold. So it creates an inflammatory state. So I love to get labs that evaluate the person's state of inflammation, because we know that chronic inflammation underlies so many problems that people experience with their health and their emotions. In fact, we know emotions now, depression, for example, is really a manifestation of neuroinflammation. Inflammation is involving the brain. And we know that the diet, the standard American diet we call SAD, right? Is very involved in psychiatric and reproductive health. A lot of people have problems with infertility. And we can do tremendous things just by changing the diet, the environmental toxins, but we have to start somewhere. So I like to look at the state of inflammation. So I happen to use the Cleveland Heart Lab for most of my inflammation markers. They have this amazing array. So you can look at not just the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is a protein made by the liver. It's like what we call a surrogate marker for inflammatory cytokines. So our immune cells can make these products called cytokines, some of which are inflammatory. Now, in the proper situation, they're life-saving. They're actually how our bodies protect ourselves against invaders like viruses and bacteria and parasites and fungus and all that kind of thing. But when we have a chronically inflamed state, we can end up producing these inflammatory cytokines inappropriately, and they can circulate in our bodies. And there can be like even implants can create chronic inflammation as the body looks at the implant, for example, as a foreign entity and is trying to fight it, like an invader. So we can measure some of these inflammation, this cytokines, by getting this protein, because it turns out that the liver responds to these inflammatory cytokines by making this protein high sensitivity C-reactive protein. So that is what we call a reactive inflammatory marker. In other words, if you get sick, if you have the flu or a cold, or you didn't get enough sleep last night, because we know chronic sleep deprivation creates chronic systemic inflammation as well. That can go up and down on a daily basis, but it's still very useful. You have to often get that more than once. You have to look at the trend of it. If it stays very, very high, like over 10, that is often a sign of autoimmune disease. And in terms of like breast implant, I've seen some very high levels in women who have breast implants. Another inflammatory marker is MPO, which stands for myeloperoxidase. So myelo means it's the white blood cell, and peroxidase is an enzyme. So anything that ends like ace is an enzyme that the body makes. And as you know, like hydrogen peroxide, well, this is peroxidase. So it's kind of like your own body's natural hydrogen peroxide, which of course would be very harmful for bacteria. So it's designed to kill invaders like bacteria. The problem is if you have inflammation going on through your body, then these white cells can produce this enzyme and it circulates in your blood. That's a bad thing. And that can increase cardiovascular risk. And we see that in women higher, like who have polycystic ovary syndrome. I saw one level, the optimal level should be under 300. I've gotten a level in women, I check it with my breast implant women, and I have had occasions where it's been over 1,000. And then finally,
I believe it.
And when they had explantation and it's removed, it goes down to normal. So it's really phenomenal what you can learn about what's going on with the body in terms of autoimmunity and implants and just general inflammation states in chronic low-grade hidden like self-infections, that people can have infections that they don't even know, like Epstein-Barr and so on. So these inflammatory markers are very useful. So it's really great.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and then, of course, from there, I actually check every one of my patients annually for their anti-nuclear body, ANA.
Thank you.
Because I'm so glad that you agree, because autoimmunity is rampant now. I mean, my job has really transformed over the years, and I get thyroid antibodies on everyone. I get very comprehensive thyroid tests on everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Because we can reverse these things, but we have to be proactive. These are not stop thinking fatalistically like they do, the
totally.
And the endocrinologist is like, we can't do anything about it. Yes, we can. Absolutely, we can. We know that it takes a good decade from the time you get your anti-nuclear antibody positive until you actually manifest with a full-blown clinically manifested autoimmune disease, whether it's lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or Hashimoto's or psoriasis or scleroderma. There's such an array of every organ in the body can have antibodies produced to it. And then we have to go deeper and see why is this happening? But, it's like the old proverbial peeling the layers of the onion that we want to see. First, we do sort of we cast a broad net to look at what the total status of the body is. And then based on what we find with our first broad net, then we can hone in on what really needs more attention. So is there inflammation? Well, what's the source of the inflammation? Is there autoimmunity? What's going on? Are there self-infections? What barriers in the body are damaged? And one of the barriers that is not talked about as a source of autoimmunity is the vagina. That's another barrier. So any interface between the body, the interior of the body, and the outside world is a barrier. So wherever we have a barrier, we have immune cells lining up, ready to fight the battle if somebody gets through. But we have to have the environment right. So the first layer of our protective environment is our microbial populations, our microbiomes. And so we already know that most of us have damaged, to a very high degree, our gut microbiomes. And we've done a lot of terrible things to our skin microbiomes, our mouth microbiomes. I mean, you can name it. But there aren't too many people yet talking about the vaginal microbiome. And when you damage that, you're taking the first protective layer away. And then if you add in all kinds of other chemicals and other things happening, and you take away proper hormones, either by nature because you go through menopause, or not by nature, you go on birth control pills, or you put something else inflammatory up in there, it's such a problem because I've actually worked with Dr. Schoenfeld, who's one of the leading researchers from Israel on autoimmunity. And he's done a lot of research on how vaccines can, in some selected populations, can trigger autoimmunity. And he calls it his Asia hypothesis. And it seems very, very valid because, you're actually putting in these antigens and so on. And in certain select populations, it can trigger autoimmunity. And we've also talked about how vaginal meshes, which are used. Oh, okay. No. The vaginal meshes. By the way, I want you to know that I was a very, very proliferative surgeon. I did a ton of surgery in my heyday. I've really way cut back now, and I just do little things, but I was doing tremendous amounts of surgery. I taught surgery to the residents. I did their first hysterectomy with them. I did all kinds of surgery training. When I was I was an assistant clinical professor at USC, and the manufacturers of all the devices, the surgical devices for women, they came to me first. Okay. And they said, wow, we'll train you, and then you train the other doctors. So I was what you might call an early utilizer, or I was trained in everything very, very early, like first out the box, as soon as something became FDA approved. So I had training on the meshes by multiple companies for all these gigantic mesh kits. And I said, no. I said, no, you can keep your money. I'm not going to train you. I'm not going to use it. And the only mesh I ever used was a tiny little ribbon for stress incontinence, which is just a tiny little one. All the other giant broad, which I stopped also doing that quite a while ago. But in terms of the big broad meshes for the cystoceles, the rectoceles, I refused to do that. I wouldn't train anyone. I talked against it. And of course, we know where that all went. But there's also now, there's some research that interferes with the proper function, and that can actually predispose as well to autoimmunity, as the vagina being the entry point of bacteria and other foreign antigens, which can trigger the whole autoimmune response. So it's really something, and we could talk about it another time, but I was trained in the Essure. I don't know if you've ever talked about that. That was the sterilization with the little coils, the little metal coils that went up into the fallopian tubes. And I actually used it a few times because I said, well, this is great. You don't have to do, a laparoscopy. And right away, I had problems with my patients right out the gate, where they were having abnormal bleeding and pain. And I reported it. And I said, this is a very bad device. There's something really wrong. My patients they were doing fine. And we just had a sterilization, and now they're having pain and problems and bleeding. And some of them ended up with hysterectomies, and I felt terrible. And I just stopped doing it right away. And I reported it. It took another 15 years before they took it off the market, so,
Thank you for reporting it. There's so many doctors not even reporting it.
I know. So I went through I did the morcellator. So, I was there with all these devices that were used on women. And I said, no, I used the morcellator like 3 times. And I said, no, this sprays little bits of tissue everywhere. You can't control it. And then they finally took it off the market after someone died because it sprayed cancer, sarcoma from the uterus in a young woman everywhere. And then she died. So, so I've been there on the front line. So I've seen like the worst of like high tech and where it gets you. So I'm a little bit more into low tech. I'm also not the first out the gate to use any product on people, because I know now, oh my gosh, I've seen drugs that came out and then they were taken off the market because they were killing people. So, but so the bottom line is that you really want to use caution. And I'm back to very basics. We have to start with the foundations of health, which you focus on, like nutrition and sleep, and all of these things are so key to getting health. And I know I got off track there because I get so on my high horse about all these things that have done.
Unicorn.
Yeah, that's right. Unicorn, because I've said, I'm going to remember that, because I've seen so much harm done to women. It just gets me so.
Me too. I'm like, no, put your cape on. Put it on, Dr. Please. It's on. I see it.
I know. It all got started because I get AMAs, but I get it because they've done all this stuff to poor women, and so we definitely want to check for autoimmunity, and we want to check for thyroid. We want to look for optimal levels. We don't want to, I keep explaining that a reference range is not normal.
Thank you. But thyroid tests is absolutely look at all of your thyroid markers and then look at the antibodies, because I can't even tell you how much as a practitioners that I say when we're doing like the woman, all these things in the woman's life, like the foundations, like you mentioned, Dr. Felice, is what we talk about with their mindset and their heart set, oxytocin. Like, let's get some love and creativity up in your life. Let's not just talk about nutrition and sleep. let's get creativity in your sacral and love and expression and connection. Like, we got to get that up in your life too. It's not just about nutrition and exercise and like sleep. We got to get love up in here too.
Oh, I love that. I have a slide that I often, because I do a lot of speaking, lecturing around the world in the country. And I have a slide that I found, which I give credit to. I didn't make it, but it shows sort of like the perfect setup for having a good life. And it shows people dancing and holding. It's a little diagram. It's a picture. It's not a photo, a little sketch. And it shows like women like in a little circle. I mean, I look at them as women, like, and they're dancing together. It's part of the slide that shows the circadian rhythm. It shows the food. It shows the adrenal. I mean, it's just this great little picture. And I just say, you know what, you can't leave this part out. You have to have love. You have to have connection. You have to have, that's so key. We know that as people age, one of the biggest risk factors is loneliness.
Yes. Yes. That, I mean, so many women are wondering why we're depressed. And it's like, we think that it's about performance. We think that it's about having a significant other, but you can be in the wrong relationship and be so lonely too. So it's the connection with yourself is the most important, and that will draw in the right people into your life. That just period. And if you want to look around at your life and think that your life is doomed because of someone's out to get you and you just were dealt a bad hand, you treat people in your life how to treat you based on the way that you treat yourself. If it's with love and reverence and self-respect, and you give yourself self-care and self-love and fast, and you do it with intention, that's what you get back. So it really does start with all of these key tenets. But let's talk about, viral. We're talking about these like retroviruses coming out and the HPV vaccine. That's originally why I reached out to you, because I want to talk about HPV. And I know we can't get super duper with that because Facebook is mandating that. So whatever you can offer would be great. And then also whatever opinion that you have about mammograms versus other ways to check for breast health would be great.
Well, here's something that is sort of one of those paradoxes of sorts. So we give universally, they're trying to give like the HPV vaccine to try to lower the incidence of cervical cancer. So certainly that's a very good goal. Some of the concerns are, in terms of that small population that may have autoimmunity. So that is definitely a concern. We know that there's some people that have reactions. That's why they have the warning, don't get up and so on, that you can get postural hypotension. And a lot of people get really bad reactions on their skin. They get big, giant, like red welts, which never feels really good. But, and then there's a bunch of strains of HPV that are, of course, not covered. So I've been around a long time. So I've seen what happens. So, for example, with the pneumonia vaccine, the first one came out and it worked against certain species with the pneumococcal vaccine. And then after about a decade or so, it wasn't working anymore. So then they came out with the new improved version, and the new improved version covers more of these types of pneumococcal vaccine, pneumococcal bacteria. So my concern is, well, what about another 10 years? Because we keep having bacteria, viruses, they outsmart us because, if there's different strains and you get rid of a couple and they sort of disappear, what is going to keep the other strains from filling in the gap? So, and I have patients, I'm seeing them who've had the vaccine and then they're coming into me and I'm getting pap smears and they are having positive high risk HPV. And then they type it. So they say not 16, 18, 45. So it's not the types that are covered, but there's still like another dozen types. So, and now they're going through the same old. So I have to do the colposcopy, the biopsies. I have to do all these things when they have persistent. I have to follow up. I have to make sure that they don't have high grade dysplasia or even cancer. So I'm concerned that we're going to have like this honeymoon when you have a reduction of incidence of dysplasias, these like potentially precancerous lesions of the cervix. But as we go down the line, a couple of decades even, suddenly we'll be back where we started or even worse off, which is what happened with the pneumococcal vaccine and pneumococcal pneumonia. And then they came out with another one. But, it's challenging. They keep coming out with another one, and maybe they won't be able to cover them all, and we'll see. But at the same time, we're giving the bulk of women birth control pills. Now, this is not debated. This is not, alternative theory or something, but so it's published data that women who are on birth control pills for 5 years, just 5 years, which is like nothing in the life of the typical woman on birth control pills, doubles her risk of having cervical cancer. It really dramatically goes up. So, I mean, now you can talk about real numbers. Cervical cancer is not a really common cancer. So even if you increase the risk significantly from a percentage point, the numbers are not that high. But that's always been the case, because fortunately, cervical cancer is not one of the most common cancers. But here we're doing something as a major campaign to try to lower the incidence of cervical cancer, while we're giving all these women the birth control pills, which increases the risk of cervical cancer. So, and nobody seems to comment on that. Nobody seems to care. The same thing with breast cancer. When breast cancer is increased with birth control pills, and yet no one seems to care. And it's like, they always say, well, it's not that significant. It's like, okay, it's not that significant. So that is a challenge. So, we definitely have to think about the total picture of what we're doing. So I'm totally in favor of vaccines for life-threatening illness. But we just want to try to make them as clean as possible. We don't want to necessarily put in DNA that we don't disclose, or that we use adjuvants that maybe haven't been as well tested. Or have mercury or other preservatives. So we want to just really, I think we should focus on the life-threatening diseases. I think, they can be life-saving. So we have to look at that. So everyone has to decide for themselves about, having HPV vaccine, but they have to see, that we don't know everything about it. We don't know what's going to happen to the virus, but, that's a complex subject, of course. And what was the other one that you would like?
Yeah. The mammogram topic.
Oh, of course.
The mammogram topic.
Okay, that's the elephant in the room. Right. So mammography. Mammograms do save lives, but they don't save a lot of lives. They don't save anywhere near the number of lives that people, even doctors, think that they save. So there was this big meta-analysis done, and it's been very respected. Nobody is like thinking it's a bad, a meta-analysis is when they look at studies that have been deemed to be respectable and properly done and so on. And then they look at them, and then they take the data from multiple studies to try to create a bigger picture than what one study could create. So that's called a meta-analysis. And so one was done, and it looked at a very large, well over like 600,000 women. And what they found was that the number of lives saved varied from age group to age group. And so if you did a mammogram on 10,000 women who are age 40. A lot of people are like the American College of Radiology suggests that you start at age 40, and the U.S. Health Task Force, they say it's not mandated or recommended at age 40. It's everyone individualized. See, you and your doctor discuss it and decide if you want to start at age 40, but they suggest that all women should start at age 50. High-risk women should be individualized and so on. But if you got it at age 40, which a lot of women are getting, in fact, they did a study and they found that most doctors are just routinely recommending starting it at age 40. They're not even looking at the other recommendations and so on. So they're starting at age 40. So if you did 10,000 women, you would save 3 lives.
That's it?
Yeah.
Whoa. What are they doing with that information? Is that?
Well, they recommended that women should have this information so that they can decide. And at age 50, if you did 1,000 mammograms on the average, now we're talking about average women, not women whose mothers and grandmothers and everybody had breast cancer. We're talking about average risk, which is the majority. That's why they call it average. Average risk women at age 50, if you did 1,000 mammograms, you would save 1 life. Wow. Is what they came up with. So 999 didn't. But the other problem is that they're saying that there's unfortunately a lot of overdiagnosis and overtreatment, because there's a lot of cancers, but we don't know which ones are going to be which, that even if they were never detected and never treated, they were never going to progress or kill the woman. But then the woman goes through surgery, radiation, often chemo or estrogen, depletion. They block estrogen in the body. with like aromatase inhibitors, or sometimes they give, a different kind of drug like tamoxifen, which has other issues. So they get what is really toxic treatment, and for something that was never going to kill them. So this is what that meta-analysis came out with, and it's really altering, the way that most people would think about it, is that they said at no age that was studied was the benefit of mammography surpassing the negatives, the downside, the harms of mammography at any age. The harms were always greater than the benefit, which is really, like such a shocking and painful thing for something to hear that, because we have been told, I was certainly brainwashed, or, it was in my brain, like hardwired, that mammography saves lives. I mean, that became like the slogan, right?
Right.
Mammography saves lives. Well, I already told you it can save lives, but it also harms lives. So it's a very difficult thing, because it is the standard of care. It's the standard of care that women have mammographies. And in fact, in many big healthcare systems, they actually do metrics on the doctors. And if they do not have a high rate of mammography of their patients, those doctors are really harshly punished. Like you were a bad doctor. Your patients are not getting mammograms. So, you're going to be dinged or fired, So it becomes like really hard for a doctor to say, yeah, you know what, just think it over. I mean, even like giving the information, like think it over and you decide for yourself. If you think that at your age 50, that you're going to be that one in the 1,000 whose life is saved, because you are intuitive, you think you're that one, then you should do it. But if you say, you know what, I've never won anything in my life. I've been to raffles, I've played lottery. I'm probably
never win at bingo.
I'm always, short B12. Never, I never get it, and that's why I take B12. I still never get that little thing. So the bottom line is then say, well, maybe I'll be more likely to be one of the harmed ones than one of the saved ones.
What do you mean? Can you talk about what you mean by harmed? Because I speak to this, but like, I'd love for my listeners to hear how you would describe being harmed with the pancake.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the actual doing of a mammogram. So we know that it's traumatic to the breast to be pancaked, right? It is traumatic. It creates, so we know that trauma creates inflammation. So it's sort of another crazy maker. You're traumatizing the breast on a repetitive basis. Like if we do biopsies, this is a known fact. From the Gale model of risk factors, like looking at predicting risk for breast cancer, they include trauma to the breast. Like if you do biopsies of the breast, so you're cutting open the breast, you're sticking needles in, or you're poking it, you're cutting it, just trauma to the breast itself creates inflammation in the breast, which then leads to a higher risk. So it's hard to imagine that, crushing the breast so hard and creating pain is not in some way creating inflammation in the breast. But of course, there's no real hard data on this, So that's more like we know inflammation. Chronic inflammation creates the environment for DNA breakage, which is what can lead to cancer. Now, you're creating inflammation. At the same time, you're putting in a carcinogen. So nobody questions that radiation is a carcinogen. It just is. We know that. It's ionizing radiation. That's what mammographies are. So, the thing is that if you start at each one is not a high amount. It's not a high amount, each one. But when you're doing it repetitively, we know that the damage from ionizing radiation is cumulative. So it's not like, you start over with a clean slate each year. You don't. It's a cumulative injury. And when you do mammography in very old people or very young people, those are the most prone to creating DNA damage, and because of the environment that it's in. So if you do, for example, mammographies in women in their 40s, that same dose of radiation is more likely to create harm than the same dose in a woman who's 10 years older in her mid-50s. Now, if you get out towards 70, those women, or into the 70s, those women already have a weakened immune system. They're more prone to cancer. We know people as they get older are more prone, like in their 70s. So the DNA damage is more likely to happen from the ionizing radiation for women who are older. So the best and safest time for a mammography is actually between 50 and 60. That's actually the safest years to do mammography. And then the younger and the older are more prone to have damage from the ionizing radiation. Now we have this new thing that's called tomosynthesis, the 3D mammograms. Now 3D mammograms, which have really taken over where I am, probably where you are, because you're just down the street.
Yeah.
So the 3D, everyone comes in, they pretty much, encourage them to have the 3D. But, so 3D is a CAT scan. They don't say, we'd like to do a CAT scan of your breasts, because that's just, I don't know, it doesn't ring well, the sound of it. So they say, we're going to do 3D. But nobody goes and has like a CAT scan of their abdomen or their brain, and then they say, we're just going to do 3D X-ray. They don't call it 3D. They say you're going to have a CAT scan, but they don't say that for the breast. So at a minimum, an absolute minimum, you get double the amount of radiation when you do that. And I've talked to some radiologists.
Than regular mammograms, you mean?
Yeah, then the regular digital, when you add the 3D component. And some radiologists have said to me it's about 3 times. But I've never seen, I've had many patients go to have mammographies, because that's the standard of care, and they go, I give them options. And most women want to have a mammogram because they believe with all their heart that they need it. And I totally get it. I mean, because it's such a conflicting feeling, to say, well, you could save your life, but you're more likely to do harm. It's really, because it goes so against the grain how we've come to think about mammography. But when they go, they're not getting informed consent by the radiology. I try to give them informed consent to everyone, but and tell them the pros and cons and let them make up their own mind. And I support them with whatever decision they make, because I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if they're that one. I don't know, so I let them make their own decision. But when they go to the radiology center, I've not seen anybody getting informed consent where they're saying, well, they're just being told, well, you should have the 3D, and they're not being told, well, is there any downside? You're getting more radiation. There also is the potential, which hasn't really been looked at, for more false positives, because it might be more sensitive. Maybe it's going to pick up things that aren't cancer, and then you end up getting into more trouble with false diagnoses or overdiagnoses and so on that lead to biopsies. The other thing that happens is, as soon as a woman is told that she needs to come back for additional views, we're not sure, we want to add an ultrasound, 99% of the time it turns out it's nothing, but occasionally it is something. But a lot of times there's a lot of recalls, a lot of redos and that sort of thing. Those women, even when it turns out to be nothing, they feel like they are now sitting ducks, waiting to get breast cancer. They now feel that they're high risk, even when it really isn't high risk. And they actually have a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. And this has been studied. And we now know that your emotions have such an impact on your health. So I keep wondering, are we promoting breast cancer by creating this chronic stress state in women who have mammographies where they keep having them come back and do more views, and let's repeat it in 6 months. And then they, after doing that for 2-3 years, they say, we didn't find anything, you can go back to once a year. But at that point, it's too late. They really feel, even though it was nothing, they feel like they are doomed. They feel doomed. And it's really created a post-traumatic stress disorder. I know every woman who's told, we want to do a redo, we want to do a repeat, we want you to come back sooner. They feel such a high level of anxiety. It's unbelievable. And it is believable, because, breast cancer is tremendously feared, of course, even though fortunately the percentage of women who die from breast cancer versus the number who are diagnosed is quite different. And of course, that is because many breast cancers are ductal carcinoma in situ, which is not really invasive yet. It's like a very early stage. Some people wouldn't even call it cancer, because it's not truly invasive, but they lump them all together. And women feel, very emotionally traumatized by these repeats and so on. And, even like the early diagnosis, which has a very low, incredibly low probability of them dying from it, especially once it's treated, but they feel their bodies are so traumatized by what they have gone through, and their brains even more. So emotionally, it's really devastating. So these women are not always paid attention to, especially the ones who are told in the end, you don't have anything, but they've gone through three years of all this extra screening, and they feel, really emotionally, taken through the ringer, and they have actually a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. So I personally give my patients all the information. And now we're talking about, if somebody has a strong family history, that's going to be different, because that's going to skew the odds into making it more probable that their life will be saved by a mammogram. But part of the problem is the foundation of mammography. It's based on the assumption that breast cancer starts really little and it gets bigger and bigger. It hits some magical stage or size when suddenly it metastasizes. And so you just have to find it before it gets to that point. The problem is that there is no magical size. It could, if it has a blood supply, and if it doesn't have a blood supply, it's not alive. So we know that even the tiniest breast cancer has a blood supply, and it has lymphatics that go to it. So you could have metastasis from a very, very, very small breast cancer. And in fact, that happens. That's why detecting breast cancer, whether it's through an exam or a mammogram, does not equate to saving that person, because it doesn't work. It seems like it should, it just doesn't seem to work that way. That's why when you look at overall mortality from breast cancer, it really hasn't changed that dramatically. But if you look at stage for stage, because now they're diagnosing a lot of breast cancers that may not actually have progressed. So it's a really complex situation. But the bottom line is that every woman really needs informed consent, and then decide for herself if she would feel more comfortable having the mammogram or actually more comfortable not. And it really should be like everything in life, that the patient, like you said, is empowered to make her own decisions. I consider my patients to be super smart, really smart women, and they are certainly able to make, as much heads and tails of this information as anybody else, so that they can decide, what, I would just as soon do it. It's the standard. I think I might be that 1 in 1,000 or 3 or 4 in 10,000. I just would rather get checked out. Or others that say, what, I have all these friends that have gone through all this, and I, with false positives and coming back, and I just don't want to do it. And then what we want to focus on is breast cancer prevention, by trying to have the best diet, to have the circadian rhythm. We know, for example, that women who work shift work, they work a lot at night, like the
major carcinogen.
Exactly. So we focus on what we can do to try to lower risk. But we know postmenopausal women, the biggest risk factor is gaining weight and getting obese. That is like that we can dramatically lower recurrence of breast cancer in the menopause. Better than giving the drugs is by working on lifestyle, maintaining a healthy weight and fitness. So there is a lot that we can do. And mammogram, I wish we had something that was better. And thermography, unfortunately, has value as a screen for breast inflammation. But it's not a breast cancer screen. So, and there's it's not really a standardized test. The people who do it have very little training. So it is not, I don't mind if anyone wants to get a thermogram in my practice, but I try to make sure they understand what it is. It's looking at heat, so heat is generated by a lot of things, including cancer, but it's not a foolproof thing. And it's not been shown to be useful to truly be a cancer detector. It's really an inflammation detector. So people have to really be sure that they don't have the wrong idea about what they're getting.
I want to interject here because I've my breast implant illness, or that sounds kind of big to me, but like I would say it's my path back to health wellness, because I have symptoms of that. But we never know what one thing is causing all of these symptoms. There is no one test for this. We're living in a toxic soup of our emotions and thoughts and chemicals and people. So it could be from anything, but my breasts are definitely not healthy right now. They're screaming for me to slow down. And they are, this is the work of, is it Louise Hay, talks about if you have breast issues, especially lumps and the energetic issues from that, or breast cancer, is being someone who neglects self and people pleases at the expense of self. So there is an emotional component to it. And I've gone through all of these except for mammogram to explore what's going on with me. I've done the thermo, which is kind of what kicked this off about a year ago. But I experienced that a thermo is not a thermo is not a thermo. It's the person who's operating it.
Yeah.
And labs and screens are only as good as the practitioner who can help you interpret what exactly it means to your body. And so I learned that. And then I went and I did, and they were like, when I was going through this whole journey, they're like, mammo, mammo, mammo. I'm like, no, can you just write down no on my thing? So you guys stop asking me, please. I'm not going to do that. And I was polite about it. You don't have to be a bitch about it. You can be a boundary badass, but not a boundary bitch about it, you know? So you could politely say, yes, I that's something that I'd like to do. I did a, infrared, or not infrared. I did an MRI, and I did an ultrasound, and especially for mammograms, doing that with implants, it could increase the risk of rupture, and it's harder to detect things in that too, in the gray area. So, and then with my mom, I wanted to comment about this, is that she was diagnosed with like a stage 0 breast cancer, and they wanted to give her chemo for it. And, you know, we had the discussion. I was like, Mom and Dad, you guys can do what you want to do. It's totally up to you, but I just want to share these things with you. And they went and talked to that doctor, and my dad was like, give it to me straight, doc. If this is your wife, what would you do? And you know, they shared all the things that I expressed to them as their, you know, daughter / nutritionist / whatever. And he said, I'm not supposed to say this, and I could lose my job for this, but I absolutely would not do this with my wife. I don't stand behind this kind of treatment, and I stand behind this if you decide not to do it. So I thought that was amazing for the doctor, and it changed my parents' perspective on how to take their own health back by becoming their own healer. So these are behind the doors conversations, you know, you could have with your doctor. But these doctors are not bad people. They're just in a system that, like Dr. Felice said, that they could lose their jobs.
And they do. Oh my gosh, there are doctors that do. I mean, that's no joke. And their livelihood and their reputations go down the tubes. And when doctors go off, you know, into a different direction, they don't do what they call standard of care, and they don't document or whatever, they can be hauled in front of the medical board. They can be reprimanded, even lose licenses. So it's a challenging situation, but you can never go wrong by giving patients full information. I mean, that's what you really have to do. And then it is hard, because sometimes there isn't enough information or sometimes there's not the best alternatives. You know, like I always talk against birth control pills, but it's not like I have the perfect contraceptive in my pocket, you know? So I totally understand that there's no perfect way. There's no wonderful way to prevent fertility and not impact on the health of the woman when they're so intertwined in the reproductive years. You know, fertility is health itself in a reproductive age woman. So it's a very complex thing, making these decisions. But, you know, it's wonderful that your mom had a doctor who really went out on a limb and said, I know, that really is. I
just was like, hallelujah, that, you know, we bring in these people into our lives to teach us something and to partner with us instead of to profit from us. And it's such a different distinction. And sisters, use your intuition. I say that's your unicorn horn. That is your magic. That is your intuition. It's right here. It's called your third eye. And for so many of us, it's been suppressed because just trust your doctor, don't trust yourself. And it's like, hold on a minute. You've got intuition that goes off for a reason. Stop and ask questions, and really ask a lot of questions to your doctor. If they don't answer you, or if they get triggered by you, move right along and find someone like Dr. Felice, because you can feel the difference. Like, I know you can feel the difference. The last question that we have is that if you could go back in time and sit with your 15-year-old, your inner child 15-year-old, your inner teenager, your spicy, independent teenager, as a friend, as a mother, a mentor, what advice would you give her, Dr. Felice?
Well, a lot of the advice I've actually given to you, you know, all of your listeners, and that is to really trust your instincts and to go with what you know is right. And like I believed authority figures for too much of my life. I said, you know what, they're smarter than me. They're better than me. They know more than me. And I just was almost like a blind follower. I mean, it took me a lot of years of living and working before I said, wait a minute, this isn't like making sense, you know. And I wish that from my teenage years that I was, you know, more trusting of my own judgment, my own instincts, so that I didn't just blindly follow and do things that people told me to do, and that I really I thought more independently. And it took, I mean, at least better late than never, but it did. I wish that I had more self-confidence when I was young to go my own path and not be afraid of criticism or sort of bucking the authority figures that seem to have control and power over me. And I wish I had been like stronger to be more, using my unicorn. I wish I had recognized the power of the unicorn a little bit earlier.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful. I wrote this down and it just felt so right, is that listening to your physical mind, body, and spirit. Your physical is your instincts, your mind is your intuition, and your inspiration comes from your heart. So that is the trilogy. When you get all of these things together, you are whole and you are complete, and you just need you. And then you will draw all of the right people into your life, like this show. And what the show is all about is that when you start listening to you and slowing down enough to hear the inner wisdom that's coming through you from your higher powers, then you can really come from a centered place, a rooted place, and you become a fully embodied tree, and you could grow all the strongest branches in the world, and you could, your fruits, your leaves, your colors change, and you could give so much more because you're coming from a place of abundance. That's my favorite dance, abundance. Yeah. Do it with your sisters, dance. Okay. So Dr. Felice, thank you from the bottom of my horn and my heart for being here today. I mean, this show was my favorite show because there's so much that you had to give. It's coming from all different places, not just analyzing. You are truly an embodied woman, and we appreciate you being here with us. We'll have her back if she's cool with coming back to our Unicorn Warrior Tribe. But for now, we bid you adieu. Thanks again, Dr. Felice, for all of this empowering information and inspiration for all the ladies watching. And we'll see you hopefully on the next show. Bye for now.